Meccano. Hi, if you want even more Meccano goodness, why don't you check out my Patreon channel? And please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I post updates in the community section, not only for this week's Patreon build, but also for what I'm currently working on. Thank you, and back to the build. Hi, and welcome to the third crane build. Okay, I'm going to be honest from the get-go. This one beat me. I just couldn't get it to operate correctly. Partly in the test build, the gear mech would just not mesh and the model would shift out of alignment, meaning the parts would move ever so slightly. And then in the build itself, but I shall explain more on that later. The crane, as I said, is the third one in the kit, and is a breaker's yard crane, or the scrappies, as it's called in this corner of the County Durham. In all the years of getting parts from scrapyards, I've never seen a crane like this in operation. They tend to be tracked excavators with claws fitted. So, what is this crane? Now that is an interesting question. It is a stiff-legged derrick with sills attached to the legs. This type of crane is great at withstanding compressive forces and excel in jobs that cover long periods of time. But I can imagine that in the fast pace of the scrapyard, when things are moved around a lot during dismantling, that a crane like this would have issues, as they tend to be located in one spot with the legs attached, set in the ground. Puss, my tabby cat, was very interested at the start of the build as to what I was doing. Ollie will make an appearance later in the video. And yes, that was me assisting him to get down. Not that he pays any attention to what I want. Construction begins with making the upright section that supports the crane and the base that the cabin gear mech is attached to. Out of interest, this is called a self-supporting tower, with the boom attached at base. This is where this crane gets frustrating. Both the upright section for the derrick and the jib are made from angle girders bolted together to make a square girder. In the jib this is fine, as there's not a lot else going on. But with the tower, there is a lot of construction at its base. This is a superstructure, and the cause of the problems that I had. One, there is no space, and secondly, you have to get it level and square. And, if like me, you are cursed with Shrek fingers, this is going to be, fun. A little bit of history. You see, this channel is not just about understanding the cause of all my frustration and off-camera rants about Meccano. Why is a derrick called a derrick? This method of lifting was created by Thomas Derrick in the 17th century. Not that he was an inventor of cranes, he was a hangman. Yep, the first derricks were used to dispatch people. He became an executioner as a pardon for a capital crime. Or more to the point, he was given the option. Either you can hang people, or you can get hanged by somebody else. He was pardoned by the Earl of Essex for the crime of rape. You see, getting anybody to be an executioner was difficult. It was a shunned job. And if found out that you were the person pulling the rope, you might well find yourself swinging at the end of one in revenge. Over his career, he dispatched more than 3,000 people, including the Earl of Essex, for high treason in 1601. Not just used for hanging people, most markets would have a derrick to weigh goods as well. Yes, that is a mini tantrum happening, born out of sheer frustration. Try as I might, I just wasn't happy with the fit of the parts. The lack of space, caused not only by the box girder construction, but also by the use of the double angle brackets to secure the strips and the smaller angle brackets together. All this came together in a perfect storm of no space and fat fingers. Fortunately for my health, I don't find this bad for my blood pressure. In fact, it's somewhat cathartic. But back to the build. That is the construction of the tower about complete. These last few flat strips form the supports for the cab and gear mech, and they are frustratingly difficult to do. I was so glad to complete this section of the build, and from here onwards it got a lot easier. The pulleys are for the action of the hook and the luffing of the jib. The side panels for the cab are also the fixing points for the gear mech and the cable drum. I feel that a lot of the problems that I encountered later were down to the flexing of these plates, as well as the problems that I encountered with the construction of the tower. The front of the cab is meant to be constructed by bending a number 188 flexible plate. I opted here to use a plastic one from the Highways construction kit. Those builds are coming after I've finished with the cranes. This saves bending a plate, and while I've got better at this skill, it is still not a strong skill. I said at the beginning of the video that this model had beaten me, and for more reason than my frustration of its construction. It was June 2020 at the time of filming this model, the height of the pandemic, and here in the UK, our first lockdown. By this point, we haven't been able to see my father for 3 months. He was in a nursing home, being cared for by a great staff team. But due to the risk of COVID, we were unable to visit him. Something we had been doing 3 times a week up to the pandemic. Receiving the phone call saying that he's passing and that we need to come up now if we want to say goodbye was a shock. Due to my mother's very frail health, she was not allowed to visit. By this point, the nursing home has COVID in. And while this was to protect her, it also felt so cruel. 65 years married, and at the end, the point of being parted, to not be able to say goodbye. My father's death was expected. He had Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and while in many ways his passing was a release from the torment of his daily confusion, it was also a devastating shock. I spent nearly 20 years in the health service, from ambulance service to frontline mental health. Death was part of my life, and I'd become very used to it. Passing of my father felt like I'd driven into a brick wall at high speed. And for nearly a year, this project stopped. I was unable to motivate myself to build anything. In fact, in many parts of my life, I just lost all drive to do anything. I was just unable to sit and finish this model. Even editing it a year later has been a difficult and uncomfortable task. The guilt of not seeing him in his last 3 months of his life sits very heavy. I know and understand the reason why. It just feels dishonourable to have left a great man to stand and die alone without his family. At least at the end I was able to tell him that his wife, our mother, was being cared for by the family. That we have not deserted her. That we will honour the promise we made to him to protect her, to care for her, when he no longer could. And at last the construction of the base. In the intervening year of filming this and editing it, I seem to have lost some footage, which, considering that I'm normally quite good at putting things like this away in the right place, it really bugs me. I've also started to learn so much more about things like lighting. I think, maybe, I am oh so slowly starting to get better. Well, like I said, maybe. For me, the creativity of both constructing the models and filming, combined with the work going on to learn new skills, like editing, lighting, etc., is a real buzz. The 3-inch pulley is the base of the tower. The angle girders that I am attaching to the pulley are done using a method called BF, or bolt fixture. This one is a BF3. This is where the bolt passes through the pulley, a nut is then attached, acting as a spacer to make sure the pulley is not warped. Then the angle girder is bolted on top. This works fine to protect the pulley from damage. Dropping the crane on the floor after filming it finished does not. The fact that the crane sat for a number of months as I tried to finish it and get some motivation going, ending up on the floor more than once, might have something to do with the now warped pulley. The BCs and BFs work fine to explain construction, but at times I think it might just be a load of BS. The angle girders on the pulley are the sills, and they attach to the stiff legs that form the support for the tower. So why stiff legs? The first derricks were supported by guy ropes, and while this works fine, ropes will expand and contract with humidity and temperature. So, the stiff legs are a step forward. The sills help keep the stiff legs in place. And as you will have noticed, when I started constructing the legs, I took them back apart again. That's because there's a right way and a wrong way of bolting girders together. Any joint is meant to be spaced hole to oval. I have a habit of trying to bolt hole to hole, which means that the parts are out of alignment. And finally, the obtuse brackets go on, fixing the legs to the sills and forming the crown for the tower. Out of interest, the Earl of Essex was hanged by Thomas Derrick for the act of treason. Now, what was this act of treason that he committed? Basically, he was fired from his post as Lieutenant and Governor General of Ireland in 1599, after failing to carry out orders. With his fall from grace, he was stripped of his positions and banished from the royal court. A year later, in 1600, the Duke was livid and decided to make his play for power. They marched on London in February of 1601, expecting the people of London to rise up in support of the rebellion. It failed. There was no support from Londoners, and a day later he surrendered, and he was hanged on February the 25th as a common criminal.